My parents worshipped my brother, treated me like I was nothing until I built a business from scratch, and left a card on their table that changed everything. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Back then, Luke was Silicon Valley royalty without earning it. He got praise for ideas he Googled, while I fixed engines in a freezing shed. When I got accepted into trade school, they refused to lend me $3,000 but turned around and paid for Luke's boot camp. That was the day I realized I wasn't their child. I was a background prop in the Luke show, and he knew it too. He smirked when I walked away. My room was a storage closet with a mattress. Luke's room had a queen bed, 3 monitors, and blackout curtains. When I bought my first wrench set with saved lunch money, Dad said, "You'll outgrow this phase." At Luke's birthday, they rented a Vergaming suite. For mine, a grocery cake in silence. Even my cousin Nick noticed. "You don't exist to them unless you're Luke," he muttered once. I didn't say anything, but he wasn't wrong. I left with $300 and a duffel bag. No goodbye, just Rocky, my German Shepherd, and Grit. Tony, a mechanic, gave me a shot scraping gum from car mats. I worked 14-hour days. Isabel, a customer at the time, noticed my attention to detail and kept coming back. Eventually, she said, "You should own a shop." Meanwhile, Luke posted selfies at fake startup events. "CO vibes," he wrote. I scrubbed grease while he posed. Tony saw I had a feel for machines. He upgraded me from gum scraper to oil changer. By year 2, I was rebuilding engines solo. Isabel designed our shop logo for free. We called it Elite Classic Restorations. One Yelp review called it precision art. My parents, they never visited, but Luke once called, laughing. "So you still playing with toys?" I replied. "Yours broke, mine runs." He hung up. That day Tony said, "You're better than blood." A collector dropped off a mangled '69 Mustang. I rebuilt it bolt by bolt, filmed everything. 2 million views. Suddenly, car forums knew my name. Isabel hung the YouTube plaque. Luke commented, "So now you're an influencer." I posted a clip of the engine roaring. No words, just fire. He never commented again. Then the '58 Corvette won Best in Show. I stood beside Tony, grease still on our shirts. Isabel teared up. That night, Luke texted, "Need tank." I posted a photo holding the plaque built. Not begged. A week later, my parents called for the first time in 6 years. "Your brother's in trouble," Dad said. "He needs family." Mom sobbed. I said he had it. I didn't. They asked me to visit. I blocked their number. Isabel asked, "You okay?" I nodded. But inside, the old ache pulsed. Nick messaged, "They're trying to cash in." I replied, "Always." Marcus, my old Marine buddy, dropped by with a busted carb. While tightening bolts, he said, "Your parents emailed me asking about you." My jaw clenched. "What do you tell them?" He smirked. "That you're too busy running a real empire." I appreciated it. But that night, I triple-checked the security cams. Rocky barked at shadows. Maybe instinct, maybe ghosts. Either way, I started locking the gate tighter. Later, Tony pulled me aside. "Your parents came by, asked for a tour." I blinked. "You let them in?" He scoffed. "Hell no, this ain't a museum." That night, Isabel found a note in the mailbox. "Let's talk family matters." I burned it, whispered. "That door's closed." Rocky watched the ashes scatter. So did I. Then came an invite, a charity gala, sponsored by Luke's company. Isabel nudged me ago, so I did. Boots, blazer, no apologies. Mid-speech, Luke saw me, glitched, stuttered. Later he muttered, "We should talk." I smiled. "You sure? Or should I leave so you can keep performing?" Cameras flashed, a champagne clinked. Nick leaned in. "He's cracking." This wasn't revenge. It was exposure with a smirk. Thanksgiving. First time back in a decade. The house reeked of polished denial, gold vases, stiff smiles. Luke tried to sound casual. "Still doing the grease thing?" I handed him a card, Elite Classic Restorations CO. His face twitched. "You own that?" I nodded. "Built from zero." The silence after wasn't victory. It was warning. They saw the shift but didn't understand it yet. Dad pulled me aside. "He's struggling, help him." I stared. "Why? He's your brother." "So was I said. He flinched. I walked away. Luke avoided my eyes. Isabel stood by the door, steady as ever. Nick texted one word, "Boom." I didn't reply. The silence already had. Luke cornered me later. "They mortgaged the house." "I need help." I kept my voice cold. "You mean they sold everything for your fake company?" He swallowed. "It's not fake." "Then show me team, product, revenue, anything." He stuttered. I left. That night, I moved our company funds into a secured account. Isabel asked, "Preparing for war?" "No," I said. "Just done being their backup plan." Tony reviewed our ledgers. "They tried opening a supplier account under your name." I grit my teeth. "Identity fraud? Borderline sloppy too." Marcus pulled security cam footage. Luke's car parked near our gate. Midnight, twice I filed a report. Isabel archived every message. We weren't just a shop anymore. We were a fortress. Nick called. "They're desperate." I replied, "Then they've forgotten who I've become." Pause. "I'm not the silent one anymore." A lawyer showed up. Said my parents were claiming partial ownership of Elite Classic Family Investment. He said, Isabel laughed so hard she cried. I handed over our founding documents, tax filings, and video evidence of them mocking my career. The lawyer left red-faced. That night, we bolted the shop gates tighter. Tony said, "They're not done." I replied, "Neither am I." Then added cameras to the back lot. War was coming. I was already armored. I confronted Luke outside a cafe. "Last chance, admit it." He looked around and not here. I pulled out my phone. "Then I'll play the voicemail you left Nick. The one where you admitted lying about your startup." His jaw dropped. "You don't want this." I leaned in. "No, you don't. Because I'm done playing nice." I posted the voicemail to a private group of investors that night. The ripple started, and Luke had no lifeboat. The voicemail leaked. Investors started asking questions. One pulled out, then three. Within a week, Luke's funding collapsed. He called, voice shaking. "Why are you doing this?" I replied, "I'm not doing anything." "You built lies." "I just opened the blinds," he screamed. I hung up. That night, Isabel popped champagne. "To clarity," she said. I toasted. "To endings." Rocky barked, like he knew it wasn't over yet. But it was finally tipping in my favor. Luke's name trended in a startup scam forum. One post read, "Elite Restoration CEO exposed him." I didn't reply, just watched. Mom texted, "Take it down, he's hurting." I deleted her number. Marcus muttered, "They still think you owe them." I nodded. "They trained me for this. Years of silence taught me precision." Tony handed me a wrench. "Then let's tighten the last bolts." We weren't just a shop anymore, we were sealing legacies. Isabel printed the voicemail transcript and framed it next to our first client receipt. "Proof and pride," she said. Meanwhile, Luke's partner sued him for fraud. Tony watched the headlines scroll. "Think they'll crawl back?" he asked. I shrugged. "Let them." Doors locked. Receipts filed. Nick dropped by with beers. "You've become a storm." I raised a bottle. "No, I'm just the weather they ignored." That night, Rocky curled near the vault. Even he slept easier now. Luke showed up at the shop, disheveled. "They froze my accounts. I'm done." I stayed behind the counter. "Not my problem." He stepped closer. Rocky growled, "You think you're better than us now?" I met his eyes. "No, I just know I never needed you." He left. Tony handed me the clipboard. 3 clients this week. That sound, it wasn't revenge, it was rhythm. A TV segment called us the Restoration Kings. Isabel beamed. Tony smirked. Luke's name didn't come up. "But Mommy mailed again. Can we talk? It's urgent." I replied with one sentence, "Talk to your golden son," then blocked her again. Marcus slapped my back. "You finally closed that chapter." I wasn't sure it was closed, but it was nailed shut at least. The silence from their end now, that was the only apology I'd accept. A former investor sent flowers with a note, "You saved us from him." Tony scoffed. "They were cheering him a year ago." I replied, "Truth just needed better lighting." Isabel added the flowers to the lounge. Rocky chewed the card and Nick texted. He moved back in with them. Their dream collapsed. I didn't reply, didn't gloat, just kept polishing a carburetor while the shop buzzed. Victory doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it just gets back to work. 3 weeks later, a sheriff dropped off papers my parents were suing for emotional damages. I laughed. A defamation only works if it's false. We sent the story to a local journalist. The headline read, "From Greece to Glory, the son they tried to erase." It went viral. A week later, they quietly withdrew the case. Cowards fold when the world's watching. A podcast requested an interview. I agreed. Told the story straight, no sobs, no slander, just facts. "So your family cut you off?" the host asked. "They never plugged me in," I replied. Isabel smiled off camera. Tony nodded. Nick sent a screenshot. Luke's LinkedIn was gone. One less mask. The episode hit #1 in 24 hours. Someone commented, "Every black sheep needs this win." I didn't reply, but I screenshotsed it. For the dark days, the city awarded our shop Small Business of the Year. A ceremony, speeches, cameras. I thanked Tony, Isabel, Marcus, and even Rocky. When asked about family support, I said, "My family built this place." Blin never showed up. The room went quiet, then applause. Nick laughed later. "That was cold." I said, "It was truth." Luke tried emailing again. "Can we start over?" I didn't open it, just archived the message. That chapter wasn't just closed, it was deleted. But closure doesn't end the engine, it resets it. Luke's old roommate messaged me, "He always resented you." I didn't need the backstory, just the pattern. Isabel asked, "Do you feel sorry for him?" I shook my head. "No, he chose that path. I paved mine." Marcus muttered, "Concrete beats quicksand." Rocky barked once, sharp. Even the dog could smell the lies lifting. A high school teacher emailed, "They never mentioned you. Always said Luke was their only child." That one stung. Isabel held my hand. Tony added, "We saw you. Always did." Marcus raised his mugger to the forgotten. Later, Nick dropped off old photos. I trashed most, but I kept one, me under a hood. 10 years old, even back then. I knew a client offered to invest. Impressed by our story, I declined. "We're not scaling, we're staying precise." He respected it. Later, Isabel said, "You turn pain into standards." I kissed her hand. Cain taught me quality. Nick sent a meme when black sheep build empires. It featured a wolf in a mechanic's uniform. I laughed. That night, I changed our shop tagline precision from pain. Tony approved. Marcus added it to the window. Rocky, he howled once. Luke tried launching a YouTube channel Startup Recovery. It vanished within a day. Nick texted. He's desperate to matter again. I shrugged. Let him chase echoes. Isabel said. You're past them. I nodded. But sometimes, the ghost of being ignored still whispered. I just turned the volume down. An expose aired on a financial news channel the rise and fall of Luke Hamilton. My photo was blurred but my shop sign wasn't free marketing. Tony toasted with soda. Didn't even pay for that ad. Marcus added. Poetic justice prime time. Isabel said. Your silence became their sentence. I replied. I never needed revenge. I just needed receipts. Rocky wagged his tail. Even he sensed the shift. We weren't hunted anymore. We were the headline. But the real victory, that came in what we taught next. A teen walked into the shop. You're the guy from the podcast? I nodded. Your story made me tell my dad I want to be a mechanic. Not a lawyer. I blinked thanks. He handed me a sketch our logo, reimagined. Tony called it the torch pass. That night, the garage lights hummed behind me. Legacy wasn't just survival, it was permission to build different and better. The state flagged Luke's filings irregularities. Then came a message one of his ex-employees. I was told to fake invoices. I'm sorry. I said, you're braver than you know. She agreed to testify. Tony warned. This might drag us into court. I nodded. We walk in ready. Isabel printed the file. We weren't afraid of court, we'd already been tried by family. Court day. Luke showed up in a wrinkled suit, alone. I walked in with Tony, Isabel, Marcus, and Nick chosen family. The judge read documents, heard the testimony. Clear evidence of fraud, she said. A case dismissed, sanctions recommended. Outside, a reporter asked. Anything you'd say to your parents? I paused. They raised the wrong son. Then I left. Truth didn't need a mic, just a witness. One message stood out: a technical college. Show our students success doesn't wear a tie. I said yes. On stage, I held up a photo me at 15. Under a car. This is where I started. Not abandoned, just misfilled. The crowd stood. Backstage. The dean whispered, you're changing minds. Isabel smiled. You changed mine. I didn't reply. Just squeezed her hand tight. One morning, I opened the shop early. A bouquet waited outside. No card, just a note. We were wrong. I knew the handwriting, Mom's. Isabel asked, feel anything? I folded the note. Dropped it in the trash. Just whined. Tony chuckled. Ghosts don't fix cars, Marcus added. Truth drives, regret walks. I fired up the lift. A Rocky barked once. The shop hummed. We had engines to rebuild, not graves to visit. Nick found an old family video. Luke's graduation. I wasn't in it, not a single mention. Wanna keep it? He asked. I said no. Isabel suggested we make our own legacy reel instead. So we did. Clips of the shop, clients smiling, Rocky chasing tires. Tony narrated, and Marcus edited. We called it Built, not Bought. It spread through trade schools like wildfire. One comment read, this saved me. That meant more than any spotlight ever could. Meanwhile, Luke tried one last stunt, claiming he co-founded our shop. He posted doctored images online. But the forums weren't fooled. One user linked our official registration, another wrote, this dude's allergic to reality. Isabel just shook her head. He's addicted to being central, Tony muttered. Keith's not even in the plot anymore. I updated our website, founded by Jared Hamilton, built by Truth. Marcus smiled. Let's keep it moving. Rocky snored nearby. Even he was bored now. A nonprofit reached out. Can you help restore cars for foster teens aging out? Isabel didn't even look at me. Yes, we cleared a corner of the shop into a teaching bay. Tony trained 2 teens. A Marcus taught safety. I handled engines. A Rocky supervised like a proud old foreman. Nick donated tools. One student whispered, nobody's ever trusted me with anything before. I handed him a carburetor. Start here, trust it back. The shop had changed, so had we, from survivalists to seed planters. Months later, a classic car magazine featured us, the quiet giant of restoration. Tony's hands trembled holding the issue. We made print. Isabel framed the cover. Nick brought cake. Rocky sniffed it, unimpressed. Marcus joked, from exile to headlines. I said, from silence to signal. Luke, still nowhere. Not in print, not in relevance, and somehow that was sweeter than revenge. We didn't just win, we rewrote what winning looked like. Bolt by bolt, a woman visited the shop quietly. I'm Luke's ex. He said awful things about you. I believed him. I'm sorry. I nodded. You believed what he needed you to. She handed me his files. They'll explain more. That night, Isabel scanned it. Fraud trails. Fake investors. He built his empire on rot, she whispered. Tony locked it in our safe. This is your closure, he said. I shook my head. It's insurance. Rocky sat under the bench, ears alert. Nick emailed screenshots. Luke was ghostwriting a redemption memoir. Tony rolled his eyes. He still thinks he's the plot. Isabel said, let him write. He'll indict himself in prose. Marcus suggested leaking the USP. I shook my head. Let his lies rot naturally, Rocky growled at the printer. Coincidence or instinct that night? I posted one sentence, some legacies fade because they never had roots. It trended. Luke stayed silent. A rival restore visited. Your reputation's gold now, but you keep quiet. I smiled. Loud hands, quiet mouth. He nodded. Respect. Later, Tony muttered, we're legends in the circle. Isabel whispered, and you're still just you. I like that. Nick forwarded a new headline. Serial fraud architect. Luke named. No mention of me. Perfect. Let the rot stand alone. That week, we judged a school auto fair. One kid whispered, your story made my dad let me take shop class. I smiled. Isabel snapped a photo, me handing over a tiny trophy. We printed it big, hung it above the door. Rocky barked once. A ceremony. Then came the letter from the lawyer who once served me. I backed the wrong client. Tony asked, frame it. I shook my head. Trash it. Isabel smiled. Powers knowing you don't need proof anymore. A museum called. Isabel curated the exhibit. Childhood tools, shop blueprints, the voicemail transcript. A visitor said, you made it without help. I replied, not without help, just without permission. Legacy didn't ask, it just proved. Nick texted a new thread. Mechanic turns trauma into empire. Comments read, this guy's the blueprint. I didn't reply, just white grease off a fender. Fame fades, torque stays. A podcast guest said, you turn rage into rhythm. I said, no into routine, no vengeance, just verification. They erase me. I built louder, they denied me. I documented their footnotes. I'm frame. A student gave me a metal sign. Silence isn't weakness. I hung it by the breaker. Isabel smiled. Tony tapped it with a wrench. Marcus whispered, that's gospel. Nick took a photo. Rocky curled beneath it. For years, silence was survival. Now it's forged. The shop doesn't yell, it hums in clean torque, healed hands and straight bolts. Justice isn't loud, it's built. A university gave me an honorary degree. Mechanical innovation. I wore boots. Isabel cried. Tony copped till red. Marcus fist bumped. At the podium, I said I wasn't broken, just misplaced. Rocky barked like he understood. That degree didn't fix the past. It stamped it. I didn't rise by chance. I build it every turn, every tool, every day. Not forgiveness foundation. Luke surfaced on a failed GoFundMe. I didn't click, didn't share. Isabel asked. No response. Let absence echo. Tony said, that's louder than shame. We laughed. He's static. We're momentum. An old teacher visited. You made it, just not how either of us pictured. I replied. He touched the shop blueprints. You turned a raw sewer into curriculum. Tony handed him a restored plug. Marcus added, truth restored. Rocky stood still. Closure didn't come with a door. It came with a lift. We hosted a reunion. No speeches, just oil-stained hugs and open bays. One kid whispered, you changed my life. I replied, you changed it. We just gave you space. Legacy isn't loud, it gathers. A journalist asked, what did you prove? I pointed to the lift. To be erased isn't to be ended. Torque testifies. Marcus added, proof beats pride. Rocky barked once. We didn't win by noise, we won by rhythm and showing up. But there was still one bolt left. Final bolt turned, final light out. No sadness, it just finish. We didn't just fix cars, we rebuilt truth inch by inch. Denial by denial. Not through forgiveness, through framework. They're dust. We're documented, built, not begged. The lift rests, the story doesn't, and always undefeated. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe to check out more stories on my channel.